New York by Campfire Light. Out in the Creek Nation, under the vast star-studded sky, we learned about New York City. It was during a hunting trip, our camp nestled beside a murmuring stream. Our guide, the seasoned hunter Bud Kingsbury, was the source of our fascination with the metropolis and its peculiar inhabitants. Bud had spent a month in the city once and a few weeks on other occasions, and he relished sharing his experiences. Across the stream, a wandering Indian family had set up camp for the night. An elderly woman struggled to build a fire beneath a cast-iron pot suspended on 3 sticks. Bud, ever the gentleman, went to her aid and soon had the flames roaring. We teased him about his chivalry. "Don't mention it," he chuckled. "It's a habit of mine. Whenever I see a lady struggling with a pot, I lend a hand." Did the same thing once in a fancy house on 5th Avenue in New York. This Injun lady reminds me of it. I always try to be polite and help the ladies out. Our campfire demanded the full story. "I was managing the Triangle B Ranch in the Panhandle," Bud began, "owned by Old Man Sterling, a New Yorker. He wanted to sell the ranch and asked me to go to New York to explain it to the syndicate that wanted to buy. So I went to Fort Worth, ordered a $40 suit, and headed for the big city. Well, Old Man Sterling and his crew were certainly eager to impress. They combined business with pleasure so seamlessly you couldn't tell which was the real purpose. We had trolley rides, cigars, theater trips, and even rubber parties." "Rubber parties?" a curious listener asked. "Sure," Bud explained. "You ever try to look at the top of a skyscraper? We walked around, trying to see the tallest buildings. Anyway, we sold the ranch, and Old Man Sterling invited me to dinner at his house the night before I left. It wasn't a formal affair, just me, him, his wife, and their daughter. But they were a stylish bunch, all right. My Fort Worth suit looked like a horse blanket compared to their clothes. The table was overflowing with flowers, and there was a whole set of utensils next to each plate. You'd have thought we were about to burglarize a restaurant before we could eat. But I'd been in New York for over a week by then and was learning the ways of the city. I watched what the others did and followed their lead. It's not so hard to keep up with the high rollers once you figure out their rhythm. I got along just fine, feeling cool and confident. I talked about the ranch and the West, told them how the Indians eat grasshopper stew and snakes, and they were captivated by my stories. But the real highlight was Miss Sterling. A small, petite woman, she had a presence that commanded attention. She carried herself with grace and confidence, but never acted superior. She smiled at me as if I were a millionaire, while I regaled them with tales of Creek Indian feasts, listening as if it were news from home. Eventually, after we had oysters and some watery soup I couldn't even name, a Methodist preacher brought in a silver camp stove with a lamp underneath. Miss Sterling lit it and started cooking right on the dinner table. I wondered why Old Man Sterling hadn't hired a cook, with all his money. Soon she served a cheesy concoction that she claimed was rabbit, but I swear there wasn't a rabbit within 100 miles. The final course was lemonade. It was served in small, flat glass bowls placed next to our plates. I was thirsty, and I picked up my bowl and took a big swig. That's where the little lady made her mistake. She'd put in the lemon, but forgotten the sugar. Even the best housekeepers slip up sometimes. I thought maybe Miss Sterling was just learning to cook. That rabbit dish certainly made you think so. And I told myself, "Little lady, sugar or no sugar, I'll stand by you." I raised my bowl and drank the last drop of lemonade. The others followed suit. Then I gave Miss Sterling a hearty laugh, just to make light of it, so she wouldn't feel bad about the mistake. Later, in the sitting room, she sat down and talked to me for a while. "It was so kind of you, Mr. Kingsbury," she said, "to cover my blunder so well. It was so stupid of me to forget the sugar." "Don't worry about it," I replied. "Some lucky guy will find a lovely housekeeper just like you, right here in New York." "If you mean me, Mr. Kingsbury," she laughed, "I hope he'll be as lenient with my poor housekeeping as you have been." "Don't mention it," I said. "Anything to please the ladies." Bud paused, his reminiscences drawing to a close. Someone asked him what he considered the most striking characteristic of New Yorkers. "The most visible and peculiar trait of New Yorkers is New York itself," Bud answered. "Most of them are obsessed with the city. They've heard of places like Waco, Paris, Hot Springs, and London, but they don't believe they exist. They think New York is the only world. To show you how much they care for their city, I'll tell you about one New Yorker who came to the Triangle B Ranch while I was working there. He came looking for a job on the ranch, said he was a good horseback rider, and he still had bits of tan bark clinging to his clothes from his riding school. For a while, they put him to keeping books in the ranch store, since he was good with numbers, but he got tired of that and wanted something more active. The ranch hands liked him well enough, but he wore us out talking about New York all the time. Every night, he'd tell us about the East River, J.P. Morgan, the Eden Museum, Hetty Green, and Central Park, until we started throwing tin plates and branding irons at him. One day, this fellow got on a bucking bronco, and the pony kind of walked up his back and started eating grass while the New Yorker was still falling off. He landed on his head on a piece of mesquite wood and didn't show any signs of getting up. We laid him out in a tent, and he started looking pretty dead. Gideon Pease saddled up and galloped towards old Doc Sleeper's place in Dogtown, 30 miles away. The doctor came over and examined the patient. "Boys," he said, "you might as well play cards for his saddle and clothes, because his head is fractured, and if he lives 10 minutes, it'll be a miracle." Of course, we didn't gamble for the poor fellow's saddle. That was one of Doc's jokes, but we stood around feeling solemn, and all of us forgave him for talking us to death about New York. I never saw anyone about to kick the bucket look more peaceful than this fella. His eyes were fixed on the ceiling, and he mumbled about sweet music, beautiful streets, and white-robed forms, smiling as if dying was a pleasure. "He's about gone now," Doc said. "Whenever they start thinking they see heaven, it's all over." Well, wouldn't you know it, this New Yorker sat straight up when he heard Doc say that. "Say," he said, looking disappointed, "was that heaven? Confound it all, I thought it was Broadway. One of you fellows get my clothes. I'm getting up." "And I'll be darned," Bud concluded, "if he wasn't on the train 4 days later with a ticket to New York in his pocket." The end. If you like the story, hit that like button and subscribe for more videos. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Was there anything that surprised you? Who's your favorite character in the story? I can't wait to hear your thoughts.